So there's this little show that you may or may not have heard of called The Office. I'm going to assume if you clicked on this video that you were familiar with the show, so I won't go through the time of explaining it, but needless to say, it is a TV show that means a lot to many people, including myself. And if you're a fan of the show, or if you've tried going on the internet since New Year's, you also probably know that The Office has been removed from Netflix and found a new home on the streaming powerhouse NBC Peacock. The Office was arguably Netflix's biggest show of all time, so this event has caused many people to talk extensively about the show and reminisce about the great times they had watching this. And most of these great times seem to come from the first 7 seasons of the show, as I don't think it's an unpopular opinion to say that seasons 8 and 9 of The Office were a significant drop in quality. While the show may have been past its creative and comedic peak for a while, these seasons featured awkward writing, weird character choices, boring or even sometimes cartoonish storylines, and the gaping hole left by the departure of Steve Carell certainly didn't do the show any favors. There was still a lot to love about The Office in its off years, however, as most of the central cast was still around, and while the focus on the supporting characters brought about varying quality, it still allowed fans to learn more about the workers of Dunder Mifflin that they had seen for many years prior. But there's still one thing that I think the majority of fans agree on, that despite the train wreck of seasons 8 and 9, the eventual conclusion of the show still managed to provide a satisfying end for the characters and the storylines that were built up for nearly a decade. Everyone was there, everyone was happy, and there was nothing more that anyone could want from the finale of their favorite TV show of all time. Or at least that would be the case if the finale was actually good. This is kind of an unpopular opinion, but The Office finale is currently severely overrated by its fans. Now, if the episode gave you a satisfying feeling and is something that brings you joy, I don't blame you, and I would never try to take that away from you. Believe me, I was certainly emotional when I first finished the show, but upon further viewings, I just can't bring myself to say that it was a good TV show finale, especially not one worthy of one of the most legendary sitcoms of all time. Something I hope we can all agree on is that the storylines and plot points were some of the strangest parts of The Office's 9th season, and ultimately a big factor in its low ratings. Whether it be Andy becoming a jerk as both regional manager and as a boyfriend, Jim and Pam's forced relationship problems, Angela and Oscar's love triangle with the senator, the season just seemed to be grasping at straws to make the show interesting again. This problem carried over into the finale, where the plot centers around 2 things: the documentary and Dwight and Angela's wedding. Season 9 decided that they were going to heavily focus on how being in a documentary has affected the workers at Dunder Mifflin for the past few years. It was a strange choice that didn't really add anything too special to the show, but I at least thought the meta nature of the storyline was a cool choice in an otherwise lackluster point of the show. It was especially interesting to see the characters reacting to finding out just how much their privacy has been invaded by having cameras around them all the time at work. And how does the finale end up addressing this? By having a Q&A session between the employees and their fans from PBS. This whole segment is hard to get through, as the same people who seem to be upset by how far the documentary crew went are now basking in their newfound fame. It has this weird reunion between Erin and her birth parents, as if that was some hanging, mysterious thread that everyone was anxious to see finished, and not just the source of, oh, Erin is an orphan jokes for a few episodes. The same result would have been accomplished with just one line from Erin about finding her parents, and instead it's one of the major emotional moments of the episode. I also don't know what kind of people would be die-hard fans of a PBS documentary series like this, but I guess it's just something we have to move past. The episode even ends with the characters praising the doc crew for being able to capture their own lives. I feel like this is supposed to be some sort of meta commentary on the relationships between the actual show and the fans and the actors or something, but it just comes across as awkward and self-righteous. It's just extremely strange to me that the documentary within the show gets so much focus in the finale, despite barely being a main component of the show before season 9. I guess the Q&A adds some moments for the characters, but not in any way that couldn't have been accomplished with a different method. The other main focus in Dwight and Angela's wedding is probably a more appropriate use of the viewer's time, and a much better excuse for all of these characters to be reunited. But I just don't think it has the emotional weight that the writers thought it would. I barely even remember the bachelor and bachelorette parties happened in this episode, because everything that happens in them has almost nothing to do with the rest of the episode or the show as a whole. Meredith's son is a stripper. Mose kidnaps Angela as a Shroot tradition. Angela has a sister. These may be callbacks or make sense in the world, but I doubt anyone was hoping to see Dwight fire an RPG and Oscar say, "What's up?" It just feels like filler in a finale that was already filled to the brim with it. I'll get into the characters later, but the fact that they acted as if Dwight and Kevin had this underlying friendship throughout the show made absolutely no sense. It was just a storyline thrown into the episode that ended with a super emotional reconciliation that didn't make sense for either character. It's just dumb. The wedding is probably the best part of the episode, as while personally I never really cared about Dwight and Angela's relationship, I know a lot of people did, and it was a payoff for a long-running storyline, so I'll give credit there. The best part of the wedding and the finale in general is by far the return of Michael Scott as Dwight's best man. It was emotional and satisfying, but still doesn't help the finale all that much. He's barely on screen at all and only gets like 2 lines, so it's hard to even be happy about Steve Carell's presence beyond the initial reveal. If anything, all Michael's appearance does is remind me how much better the show used to be when he was on it, and how Goodbye Michael is a much greater episode than what I'm currently watching. I actually almost prefer Ryan and Kelly's return, as them running off together makes so much sense, and the banter was some of the funniest dialogue in an otherwise humorless episode. But the wedding is also where the biggest sin of the episode occurs. Angela was so passionate about having her first dance at her wedding be Little Drummer Boy, and they don't dance Little Drummer Boy, even though there was a super cute moment in season 3 where Dwight was humming while Angela sang the song, and it would have been perfect, and Dwight gets to have them get married in their graves, but Angela doesn't get to have her song? I really hope there are others out there as annoyed as me. Okay, in reality, probably the biggest sin of the finale, and the reason I even made this video in the first place, is how the characters behave during it. Everyone is so loving and happy-go-lucky in a way that seems to betray the nature of the show. Now, I'm not saying that character development can't exist, as I think the friendly attitude makes sense for people like Dwight, since part of his arc is that he's learned to work well with others and appreciate those around him. But all of the characters are acting like the people of Dunder Mifflin are their best friends in the world, when that simply hasn't been true for the rest of the show. Daryl did have many friends at Dunder Mifflin, but he was someone who tried to escape the office all his life, so to have him talking about how he's all emotional about not being able to leave doesn't make much sense. It would make sense if he had just learned to appreciate his colleagues and the time he had with them, but instead he just turns into a blubbering idiot like everyone else in the most uncharacteristic way possible. Angela decides that these people are her best friends when her and Dwight skip their honeymoon. Creed is talking about keeping his Olympic medal as if he was ever friends with anybody there. Jim and Pam are sitting in the circle smiling with everyone as if they ever cared about anybody in that office besides themselves and Michael and Dwight. Andy gets to show that his life is great because he has a dream job at Cornell, even though being an admissions officer was never in any way his dream throughout the show. I don't want to go in depth about each of these, but the point is that it feels like I entered a completely different TV show about a massive group of friends, even though the whole point was to show people making the best of a bland place to work, despite having lives outside of Dunder Mifflin. The only person who ever viewed the office as a family was Michael, but he learned to be able to let go of the office and create his own family with Holly. All of this just feels like cheap moves by the writers to trick us into making us feel sad and nostalgic without actually earning those emotions. In season 7, when Michael left the office, he said goodbye to every single person who he worked with, but it's not like he was leaving with perfect familial relations with everyone. Stanley was still apathetic, Oscar still didn't respect him, Kelly didn't even notice, and Michael learned to accept this and be happy with the relations he had with these people, not what the ideal version would have been. He said goodbye to Meredith, Creed, and Gabe at the same time, because he knew he barely had any sort of unique friendship with any of them, and that was okay because he had Holly. Goodbye Michael had what the Office finale didn't. nuance and concern for how every character actually was throughout the show, not what the perfect versions of them would be. Because these characters and their relationships weren't perfect, and that's what made The Office different from other shows. You don't get along with everyone you work with, and even if you do, you're not going to be lifelong friends with everyone, and that's just the way life is. But The Office showed how you can make the most of the boring 40 hours a week you spend doing the same menial tasks around the same people, and finding beauty in the uninteresting, even if it's not always perfect. Pam's lines at the very end of the finale almost bring us back to that original theme, and I think that was the perfect way to end this lackluster episode. Pam's painting wasn't some piece of legendary art that would stand throughout the ages. It was just a painting of a building, one that only meant anything to the people that got anything out of it. It's beauty in the little things. Even if the last couple seasons were a mess, we all had our different experiences with The Office, and we'll always have that.